English, step by step. Present simple, step 1. Intermediate, higher intermediate level. So, when do we use present simple in English? Well, we use present simple when we are referring to things that happen often, or habitually, or always. For example, he works in an office, and that's something that often happens. I study English. That's something I often do. Does he know the answer? Well, know is talking about all the time. Does he know the answers? So, these are things which are true in general. They don't have to be true at the time of speaking. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's look at some examples. The doctor sees a lot of patients. Now, that means that's part of his job. It's always true. That's his job. At the moment, maybe he is not seeing a patient, but normally in his life, in his working life, he sees a lot of patients. Do you play tennis? That means, is this something you do as a habit? Now, maybe at the moment you're not playing tennis, but the question is not about now. The question is about something that is repeated. Here's a negative example. We don't usually eat in restaurants. Now here we can say usually. Now maybe at the moment we are eating in a restaurant now, but usually we don't usually eat in restaurants. So that's what it means when it says they don't have to be true at the time of speaking. Now, it's important to think about the difference between present simple and present continuous. So, the use of present simple is different from present continuous. We use present simple for repeated or habitual actions, whereas we use present continuous for things that are happening now or a temporary period. Now, you can watch my other videos about the present continuous to get a clearer idea of this. But let's look at 3 examples here. He wears a uniform. He's wearing a uniform. Well, what's the difference? Well, he wears a uniform. That means it's something that it happens, it's a repeated action. He's wearing a uniform. That means now, at the moment, he's wearing a uniform. I don't eat meat. Now, that's something that is always true, long term. I'm not eating meat. Well, that just refers to now, at the moment. Do you wait for a bus? Well, this question is about a repeated routine or a repeated activity. Are you waiting for a bus? This question has a different meaning. This question is asking for information about now. With present simple, we often use adverbs of frequency. An adverb gives you more information about the verb. It's added to the verb, telling you how something is done. Well, typical adverbs would be quickly, slowly, carefully. But here, we're thinking more about adverbs of frequency. For example, often, sometimes, usually, always, never, hardly ever, etc., etc. Now, when we use these adverbs, we don't normally use a continuous tense. We use a tense which is talking about a repeated activity or a habitual activity. So let's look at the example sentences. I often go swimming. He sometimes visits me. We usually get up early. You always come late. They never arrive on time. She hardly ever cooks. Now you can see we have the adverb before the verb in present simple. With present simple, these adverbs go before the verb, as in these examples above. Because in present simple, we only have one part to the verb. So normally in English, if a verb only has one part with no helping verbs, no extra verbs, in other words, no auxiliary verbs, then the adverb goes before the verb in English. So now let's look at some details about the form of the present simple. The form of the present simple is quite easy. Well, when you compare it to other languages, it's very basic. There is not very many changes. For example, the only spelling and pronunciation point to remember is add S in the third person. So first person is I, second person is you, third person is he or she. Now here we're talking about third person singular, so that's he, she and it. The third person plural is they. Now we don't change the verb with they, we only change the verb with he, she and it. In other words, the third person singular. So let's look at the examples. I work, he works. Now, it's a very simple, very easy change, but I think that some people often forget it because it's so simple and so easy. Next one, I think, she thinks. The shop's open, the shop opens. The baby sleep, the baby sleeps. In these two last examples, you can see the shop's open, that's plural third person. The shop opens, that's singular third person. So we add an S. The baby sleep, that's plural third person. The baby sleeps, that's singular third person. So we add an S. Now, with common irregular verbs do and go, these are irregular verbs because the form often changes in other tenses. But with these very common irregular verbs, we have to remember to add es at the end for the third person singular. Examples: I go to the gym, he goes to the gym. I do the work, she does the work. And remember the pronunciation. He goes, she does. Now there's one more spelling related rule that we have to think about, again with third person singular verbs. There is also a spelling change in verbs which end with y. Well, here's some very common examples: worry, hurry, study, marry. The first three are often used for repeated and habitual activities. In other words, with the present simple. Marry is normally not used with the present simple. Well, let's look at these examples. Y changes to I, and then after the I, it's es. Let's look at the examples. I worry about the future, he worries about the future. And remember, the pronunciation is just is at the end there. The pronunciation doesn't change to es, he worries. No, there is no es. The pronunciation is worries. He worries about the future. And again, we hurry to the bus stop. She hurries to the bus stop. The students study hard. The student studies hard. So you can see pronunciation: worries, hurries, studies. So this brings us to the end of step 1 video for the present simple. So you can move on to the step 2 video, which will lead into some practice exercises. In step 2, we'll look at the form of negatives and questions.